Now, you know, Billy uses sugar roll, and again, you know, I have to emphasize that beekeeping is very regional and very different depending on what you are doing. So if you are constantly breaking up the brood cycle and using smaller colonies, it can be feasible to manage Varroa without chemicals or without medication. But that also depends on what area you're in. You know, you saw the map where he has a genetic, you know, some parts of your state you've been able to inundate with good resistant genetics. But if you are in an area where that has not happened, like my area, you may need to resort to chemical treatments for Varroa. And this talk really centers around keeping your bees healthy and getting your maximum honey crop. Which, you know, is kind of what a lot of us want to do. Okay, so there are a lot of factors that determine your bee's ability to bring in a honey crop. The biggest one being, how many bees do you have in that colony? How strong is the colony? The proportion of foragers to nurse bees. Remember in the last talk we talked about sometimes after swarming you don't see a lot of entrance activity because there's so many nurse bees in there. You know, the timing is wrong. If you have a major nectar flow at that time, right after they've swarmed, you're not necessarily going to get a huge honey crop because you've got too many baby bees. You know, they're not ready to go out and bring in that nectar. The health of the colony, the age and vigor of the queen, the location of your apiary and the location of nearby nectar sources, the weather. You know, you guys had, somebody said the monsoons or something, you had like 20 straight days of rain. You're not going to be able to bring in much honey if it's just raining all day long. So some of these things we can control. The weather is not one of them, unfortunately. Which ones can we control? Probably the biggest thing that we can do, okay, and the biggest thing that influences the health of our bees is keeping Varroa mites to an acceptably low level. The Varroa mite, it introduces so many viruses, and the number seems to just keep getting larger and larger, and the impact on our bees seems to be getting more and more. If you read some of the studies done by the bee-informed partnerships, our bees are becoming, if anything, more susceptible to Varroa overall. So honeybees that have serious mite infestations, or a bee that has ever had any mite on her, is not going to live as long as a non-parasitized bee. Her lifespan will only be 20 to 80% that of a bee that's never seen a mite, which means that they die over the winter because the cluster just shrinks. They're more vulnerable to nosema disease. They don't grow as quickly or build up as healthy colonies do. And they don't make as much honey. Sometimes they will abscond if the mite levels are very high. We saw quite a bit of that this year. I had 5 colonies abscond on me after I had treated them because they were reinfested. And I'll tell you, it's by far the most challenging thing facing beekeepers today, especially commercial beekeepers. And of course, serious infestations, they rarely survive the winter. So let's look at what is available outside the genetics. Number one is to have the best genetics for combating the mites so that you have fewer infestations to begin with. So I'm thinking of, you know, maybe getting some of Greg Hunt's ankle biter queens into my own operation this coming spring and seeing how they do. So if you start out with decent stock, but beyond that, okay, if you do your alcohol washes, and somebody asked me to discuss the difference between that and a powdered sugar roll. The alcohol wash, there have been studies showing that it is a much more accurate assessment of the level of Varroa in your colony. So you are sacrificing 300 bees in order to get a truly good guideline for what percentage of mites you have in your brood nest. Much more accurate than the powdered sugar roll. And you kind of have to think of it, you know, your colony is a superorganism, and the actions that you take are geared toward maximizing the health of the entire colony. Okay, it's like killing a bum queen. It's a shame to kill a queen, but you're saving 50,000 bees when you do that. So yes, I have no problem killing 300 bees in order to test to see if my mite treatments were effective and what my level of mites are, to see if I need to treat at all. Part of a really good IPM program. But let's look at what mite treatments are available to us. Because if we look at what we've got in our arsenal, then we can make educated choices. All right. Apivar. Apivar, which is amitraz, okay, is a hard chemical. It's been in use by commercial beekeepers as the brand name tactic for probably about 20 years now, maybe even longer. And they've been using it pretty successfully. We think we may be seeing some resistance starting in some parts of the country, like California, but so far out here, we do not seem to have resistance, at least not in my state. It's a 6-week treatment, takes a long time, that's 42 days. Not hard on the bees at all, very easy on the bees, easy on the beekeeper, takes 1 visit, and you want to wait 2 weeks after removing the strips before you put on honey supers. So it's a very long treatment, but it's also a very effective treatment. It will kill 99% of the mites, and it's easy on the beekeeper, easy on the bees. Apigard is a thymol treatment. It's not as effective, okay? It is temperature sensitive. It takes 4 weeks. 2 separate treatments. You go in once, requires a shim, can be quite hard on the bees, kill queens, kill brood at high temperatures. Not hard on the beekeeper. You know, it's a little bit of an irritant, but it's really not bad at all. Takes 2 visits. No wait time before putting on honey supers. So your total time that you need for that treatment is only 4 weeks. But you do need an extra piece of equipment, a shim. Apilife VAR is another thymol treatment. Actually has several other, it's got, let's see, thymol, it's got eucalyptus oil, menthol, camphor, no, I think it's camphor? I think it is. Anyway, it's a combination of essential oils in like a little wafer-like tablet. It's pretty effective at the correct temperature. If it's too high, you can damage the bees, like over 90%. Minor danger to the beekeeper, it's not bad to the beekeeper. You got to go back like 4 times, which if you have, you know, more than a few colonies, that can get kind of onerous. Length of treatment is basically a month. And however, you've got another 4 weeks that you must wait before you can super. So you're really talking 2 months. Quite temperature sensitive. Mite away quick strips, formic acid. Okay, can be quite effective, about 95%. Temperature range, well, it says 50 to 92. I never put the strips on if the temperature is over about 82. And you know, in an emergency, I've done it at around 85, but I don't like it. The first 3 days of treatment are critical. You really want to watch the temperatures. Pick a time when the forecast is for not too much heat during that time. It only takes a week, and it kills bees inside the brood cells. It's pretty hard on the bees, especially at high temperatures. You don't want to get it on yourself. It's an acid. You must wear protective gloves, nitrile gloves, and you don't want to breathe the fumes. It can cause lung damage. 1 visit. The great advantage of Mite Away Quick Strips, you can use it when you have honey supers on the hive. So this is a treatment, if you find you've got high levels during your honey flow, you can put this on and not remove your honey supers. The bees can continue to make honey. Quite temperature sensitive. Okay, oxalic acid, there's a lot of questions, and I'm going to go to the next slide to discuss oxalic acid because there's really two methods. The dribble method. Some studies show that under certain conditions that can be 90% effective. Okay, the temperature range, there is no limit, but of course it's problematic if you're opening up the bees during very cold weather. Length of treatment right away, and I got to share with you, I did an experiment on the dribble method of oxalic acid where I took 84 colonies and I treated half of them in a warm spell in winter with oxalic acid, a 3% solution, 50 milliliters dribbled between the frames, and the other half I did not treat. Conditions were perfect according to the literature. It was exactly the way it's supposed to be, and what I found was I had 54% winter losses on the treated colonies and only 23% on those which were not treated. So, you know, as an engineer, I like to play around with numbers and statistics, and I concluded at the 95% confidence level statistically that the oxalic acid dribble method kills bees. I don't like this method. I would not recommend it. And yet I have heard other beekeepers say that they've had some success with it. But I don't, you know, I have not read about any other studies that were quite as large as the one that I did in my own bee yards. Now, vaporization has some potential. I have not yet used it. In my state, one of our largest commercial guys and our state apiarist are currently in the process of conducting a large-scale study to see if it's effective and its effect on the mites and the bees. According to the literature, temperature just has to be above 37 degrees. Instantaneous treatment. It probably is not hard on the bees, although there are some reports that it can burn their chitin, you know, their exoskeleton and their feet. Very dangerous for the beekeeper. You must wear a respirator. You must wear goggles, protective clothing. It can really do some serious lung damage, so you cannot breathe the stuff. No oxalic acid treatment kills mites in the brood. And of course, most of the mites are in the brood. Over half, as many as 80% of the mites are under the cappings. So that means you've got to come back 3 times, okay? That dribble method is supposed to only be used really when the bees are broodless, which means around now or into December, as a cleanup. So you knock down the phoretic bees, the bees that are hanging, you know, are hitching, doing a Meals on Wheels thing, hitching a ride on your bees over the winter. That will, you know, build up and start new infestations in spring. But you got to do 3 times if you're doing the vaporization, because that gives you 15 days, right? How many days are the bees under the capping? Worker bees? How many days capped? 21. No. 3, 6, 12. 12 days under the cappings, okay? Drones are a little bit longer. Drones 14 to 15 days. So you don't have to wait before putting honey supers on. 3 treatments, 5 days apart, and 5 days apart means that you get that whole, even the drones, okay? So everything that's in the cappings has emerged, and you have a chance to kill even the mites that have been under the cappings. All right. Then there's HopGuard 2. A lot of mixed reports about this. HopGuard 1, pretty much everybody said the stuff just doesn't work, period. Forget about it. HopGuard 2, some people are saying, yes, it works. It's a 14-day treatment. You can repeat it, I think, twice. Does not kill mites under the cappings. There's no limit to the temperature range. Not hard on the bees, not hard on the beekeeper. You can use it with honey supers on the bees. Number of visits, just one. That sounds great, but I have heard very mixed reports, and a lot of the reports that I've heard have said that that 85% is really not true. There are other factors going on. I don't know if it's temperature or what it is, but that seem to really limit the efficacy of this. I've heard some beekeepers tell me that they actually had higher mite counts at the end of the treatment than they did at the beginning. So I can't really recommend that one. All right. So here's the whole premise of this talk. Surplus nectar flows in my area, and I'm giving my area as an example to you guys, okay, just so that you get the principle of what I'm talking about. These are my major flows, so they're probably more than yours. I get autumn olive very early, starting around May 2nd, beginning of May, we start getting some flows. Black locust, May 15th to May 31st. The linden and basswood flow, very long flow, starting in June, going to mid-July. At the same time, I'm getting clovers, okay, June into July. Then we get the summer wildflowers, beginning or mid-August, going into mid-October. And the Japanese bamboo, which is a really great, dark, rich honey, starts August 15th and goes to the second week of September. Then the goldenrod starts September 1st and goes right into October. So those are my major flows. They don't always all happen. Sometimes some of them get rained out. Sometimes it's too dry. Sometimes, like this year, we got almost no bamboo because of the drought. But I know when they are, okay? And if you take it all together, in my area, May 1st to July 15th, I get honey. July 15th to August 31st, there's usually dearth. September 1st to October 1st, we sometimes get honey. Those are the fall flows. And in some areas, I might get a Japanese bamboo flow starting August 15th. These are average dates, okay, from year to year. But I've made these observations over a period of years, so I know about when these things happen, and I can plan my mite treatments accordingly. So, you have to think about windows of opportunity. Opportunities to make a honey crop, May 1st to July 15th, September 1st to October 1st, and in some areas, my Japanese bamboo yards, August 15th to October 1st. Opportunities to kill mites before May 1st. July 15th to September 1st, or if it's a bamboo yard, July 15th to August 15th. Okay, you see where I'm going with this, I hope. So the dates vary from year to year and location to location. You have to know when your own flows are, which means you drive around the area of your apiary, you look at what's there, you watch your bees coming and going, you watch when the hives are getting heavy and when they're bringing in nectar, and you find out what they're working. And from what Parks tells me, there's like a lot of different areas of different flows in a fairly limited geographic range. Okay, so treatment considerations, that's our state apiarist, Tim Schuler, another beekeeper I really, really respect. 20 years ago when I started, a single treatment in summer was adequate to kill mites. Now, most of us who are focused on honey production treat 2 or even 3 times a year. And it's really important to check your mite levels. This is one of those alcohol wash kits that we, auctioned off earlier. There is a YouTube video showing Tim doing an alcohol wash. I'd highly recommend that you check it. this is an excellent tool. I've been really, really happy with our ability to get a handle on the mite levels using the alcohol wash. And this year, remember how many, did you guys get a lot of swarming in spring this year? No, you didn't. You got rain in spring. Okay. Up in New Jersey, I had more swarms than I have ever seen in the whole time I've been keeping bees. I'm going to estimate that in spite of reversing supers and doing all the spring management I needed to, we probably had 75% of our colonies swarmed. And they still made a honey crop. But it was crazy, crazy swarming. I mean, every time I pull up to a bee yard, there was a swarm hanging on a tree. And some of them I got, a lot of them got away. The ones that got away, okay, went into the woods. And what happened was after we treated for mites in summer, we started to see colonies getting reinfested. And what I think was happening, what we're guessing, is that the feral colonies in the woods were collapsing from Varroa load. And my managed colonies are going and robbing out those feral colonies, bringing back their nectar. We had dearth too, very serious dearth due to a drought starting in summer, bringing back their nectar and bringing back a load of mites. So we actually saw some serious mite issues after treating for mites in summer. So if you want to get honey, here's one possible schedule. All right? March 1st, end of the winter, you're checking to see if your bees are alive. You're giving them emergency food if they need it. And this past year, I put 2 Apivar strips in. Okay? You use 1 Apivar strip per 5 frames of bees. All of my bees at the end of the winter are pretty much in the top box or the top 2 boxes. So on the average, I would only have to put in 2 strips. The strips are expensive. So treating with Apivar at that time of year, as opposed to when the colonies are very large, is pretty economical because there aren't as many bees and you don't need to use as many strips. Check to make sure that the position of the strips is still in the brood nest and move them if you need to. This is just during our regular colony checks and manipulations. April 1st is when I usually reverse my honey supers for swarm control. Again, you check the position. Strips have to stay in the brood nest. April 15th, the end of the treatment period, remove the strips, do the alcohol wash, and then 2 weeks later I can put on honey supers, and that's when I usually super is by May 1st. Okay. So hopefully what I've succeeded in doing is knocking off all those bees that are phoretic on the mites and knocking off the mites that are phoretic on the bees and killing most of the mites that are in the developing brood nest at that time of year. Okay. May 1st, July 15th, I've got honey supers on. You know, I'm happy. I'm watching my bees go out and make a lot of honey. July 15th, I pull my honey supers. As soon as I pull the honey supers, I do an alcohol wash. I will check and add Apivar again, okay, depending on where the yard is and what fall flows I'm expecting. At the same time, I feed my bees. So I've pulled the honey, I've begun feeding bees, we're going into dearth at that time. Feed bees, treat for mites at the same time. Okay, August 31st, that's the end of the treatment period. Pull the strips, do the alcohol wash, and then September 1st, if it's a goldenrod yard, I'm going to add honey supers. Or I can wait a little bit longer. So again, September 1st to October 15th, bees are bringing in a fall crop. I'm adding my mouse guards. October 15th, I pull the honey supers, check the weight of the hive, feed more if I need to, do another alcohol wash, add the ventilation shims, and reverse the inner covers. So what I've done is I've combined my feeding and my mite treatments during periods of dearth so that my bees can be healthy and populous when we are in periods of nectar flow. And all the time, you're checking your brood and adult, bees for health, queen vigor, swarm cells, the 4 things, right? Queen right, food, disease, and strength that we talked about earlier. Okay, different schedule, different nectar source. I have bee yards that are located near particular nectar sources, and I know which are which. So we've got a fairly new one that's near Japanese bamboo. And that starts August 15th, which means I don't have as much time to do the summer mite treatment. So check the weather forecast, and in this yard, I'm going to use Mite Away quick strips and take them off a week later. And do another alcohol wash. If I still don't like the numbers, I may repeat the treatment. August 15th, then I'm going to add honey supers, and October 15th, I'll pull the supers and proceed as before. So I have a different amount of time at that yard. There's the Mite Away quick strips. Other options, both Apigard and Apilife Var take 4 weeks. Okay, but one of them needs an additional 4 weeks that you've got to wait after treatment before you can put honey supers on. So that's why it's the Apigard that is my preference for use if I've got a 1-month window of time. This is the Apilife Var. It's these little wafer guys. These are, all essential oils. These are natural treatments, both of them. Although natural does not necessarily mean easy on the bees. Formic acid is also natural. It's not easy on the bees, and neither is the thymol. That's the Apigard. You need a shim. It doesn't have to be this deep, and sometimes this is what you get. If you get if you're feeding your bees, or you get a funky summer nectar flow, you can get a lot of burr comb in that shim. This isn't really true because HopGuard also can be used with honey supers on, not just Mite Away quick strips, but HopGuard is not, in my opinion, consistently effective. But the Mite Away quick strips, this is a really versatile treatment. As long as the temperatures are not too high, it only takes a week. It kills the mites under the brood cells, under the cappings, and you can use it with honey supers on. So there's a lot of good things to recommend it. Now, I always feed my bees when I put those mite treatments on after I have pulled my honey supers, even though they've got food in there, okay? Why do I do that? Is it because I want to keep the honey and just give them sugar syrup? No, it's not. It's because when you feed the bees sugar syrup, it stimulates the queens to lay. And I want those queens to lay a lot of really good, unparasitized brood so that I have a high population of healthy young bees going into the winter. It fills the hive with food. It's insurance. I don't have to rely on fall flows. Our fall flows are very unreliable. This year we got practically nothing. I had something like 70 buckets of spring honey, and I think I got 5 or 6 buckets of fall honey. We had a drought, so you cannot count on that. And if you start feeding in summer, the bees have tons of time to process that food and make it ready for the winter. And it works very well for them. It's insurance that your bees will have plenty of food for the winter. And as a commercial beekeeper in honey production, okay, if I can maximize my honey crop, I will, because it does fill the hive with food. So when I take off the mite treatments and put my honey supers on, hopefully I've got a hive that's already very full of food. If it's not, I don't super them. If it's not, and there's fall nectar coming in, I'm going to wait, I'm going to let them take that nectar so that they have food for winter. This is the method of feeding that I use during dearth. It's open feeding, and the reason I use this method is because there's no robbing, and the bees will bulk up on this very, very quickly. It's not appropriate for areas that have a high population around them, because as you can see, you've got like a lot of bees coming to rob this stuff out. But you put your barrels, your feeding station, far away from the bees. The literature will say 300 feet. It doesn't actually have to be that far. If there's like a copse of trees between the apiary and the feeding station, that can be, you can reduce the distance. But the bees will go, it's like they say to each other, wow, there's this really funky looking flower over here, but it's got some great food. And they go and they treat it exactly like a nectar source. So they don't rob when they're working a nectar source. And they don't rob when they're working an open feeding station. No robbing. Can bulk up hives very quickly. Please, don't put it in downtown Washington, D.C. It's a bad idea. But if you're interested in this, I think we've got a YouTube video up that Parks made of, that discusses open feeding in pretty good detail. You put some straw in, you've got to have a stick that goes all the way down to the bottom of the bucket so that the bees can crawl out. And it works really well, really, really well. So if you can't open feed and you've got to use a different method, do it, but don't let this happen, okay? Whatever you do, make sure that there are no cracks in your equipment. It's got to be in good repair. If you're feeding in a yard, feed everybody, even the strong ones, because if you just feed the weak ones that need the food, the strong ones are going to come and rob them out of everything. Don't spill syrup, don't leave hives open, use your quiet box, don't engage in what I would call risky robbing behavior. And when the fall flows begin, get your tall help so you don't have to do this. I wish I had a few more inches. First, check your hives to be sure they have, in my area, 60 pounds of honey. You guys probably need a little bit less to get through the winter, but that's what we need. And as long as they have that amount of honey stored in the brood nest, I will super them. And any hives that are light will bulk up on the fall flow. During a flow is a good time to feed hives that are still light because they're on a flow and they won't rob. So you can feed hives individually that still need it as long as you're getting some nectar coming in from other sources. And that's how we blow the bees out of the honey supers. This is Joe Trimel, who's a hobbyist beekeeper with maybe 40, 45 years experience, and he works for me a couple of days a week, 1 or 2 days a week. We'll work bees together, and we blow the bees out of the honey supers with a leaf blower. And they come out and they scratch their little heads with their little antennae and they say, what happened? And they fly back to the hive, and we stack the honey supers on the truck and go home. So that's it. May you and your bees live long and prosper.